there is a pack here that's got a couple of cards that are maybe potentially interesting. So first of all, we have a new alt art for IP Masquerena. And we have a new alt art for SP Little Knight. Now, think of these what you will. Alt arts are always very, very subjective. You know, some people like them, some people dislike them. I personally think it's always cool to have the option. I do think for IP Masquerena, I prefer the previous alt art. I like the original alt art IP Masquerena. But having an alt art SP available is cool, even though the other one is such a classic, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh card at this point, even. That I'm not sure if I want to replace it with the other one, but it's cool. And then we have this thing, which we need to talk about, because this, in case you don't know this, because you're not playing the TCG or OCG, this card is a world premiere card in Master Duel. This card has not been released or even revealed in any other version of the game. It is completely new, and it is IP and SP together on the artwork, so we're expecting a pretty good extra deck staple here. I mean, if there's anything to go by, IP and SP have been absolute extra deck staples ever since they've been printed. So a Link 3 that combines the two has got to be at least somewhat strong, right? So let's go through this together. It is a Link 3 monster that is generic. It needs effect monsters. When your opponent activates a monster effect on the field or graveyard, quick effect, you can banish this card that was special summoned this turn until the end phase, negate that effect, and if you do, banish it. It is a generic Link 3 that negates monsters. It does not negate monsters in the hand, which I think is important, because that means it cannot negate something like Nibiru or hand traps in general, so it will not serve the purpose of other generic extra deck monsters like Appaloosa or whatever that you just summon on the first turn to facilitate more combos because they negate hand traps. This card does not do that. However, it still is a pretty strong monster negation. Now, I will say this only works on one turn, which I think is also a better way to balance an effect like this one. So right off the bat, I think this is strong, but more balanced than previous monster negations on extra deck monsters. So I'm happy to see that at least. During your opponent's main phase, you can, immediately after this effect resolve, link summon a link monster. And if this card you control would be used as link material for that link summon, you can also use a link 2 or lower monster your opponent controls. Neither player can activate the effects of link monsters in response to this effect's activation. You can only use each effect of WP Fancy Ball once per turn. Okay, there's a lot to uncover here. So I think it's a good card, right? My first impression on this card is that it is good. But there are a few things to mention here, and I guess there's also a few things to talk about in general. It's like, how do you want to use this card, right? Because this card has multiple different uses where it could come up. The number one most obvious use is you use it as an end board piece, right? You summon it when you're going first. In that aspect, I believe this card is not very strong. When you just raw summon it on your turn when you're going first, you're not going to get to use the first effect of this card at all because you've just summoned it. And the second effect can be played around pretty well because this card can only link off link monsters from your opponent. You know, you cannot link off your opponent's normal summon or anything with this. So as a generic just end board piece on its own, I think this card is relatively mediocre. The second use, and I want to say the most important use of the card last, but like another thing that you can do with this card is you can summon it going second into a board. And at that point, I think it's starting to become a little bit better because when you have the link material for this available and you basically always threaten this, so your opponent is going to basically feel forced to use some of their effects maybe a little bit early because you might just link into a WP Fancy Ball to negate one of their effects right on the field. And if they have a certain end board piece and you can make this, then you can negate that card, which is an interesting use of the card because it'll run away until the end phase and then it'll come back. And then on the opponent's turn, you can still threaten the link on one of their things. So as a going second card, this card is pretty decent. The most obvious and also the most powerful use for this card is when you use it actually with the other cards in the bunch. Like if you use this card with IP and SP together, because this card, and this is what I think this card is meant for. I think it's meant to be a middle step between IP and SP, because of course IP into SP is one of the most classic end board interactions that most Yu-Gi-Oh decks have access to these days, because IP and SP are both generic. So as long as your deck isn't locked out of link monsters, and you have a couple of extra bodies, IP into SP is a viable option for a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh decks. Now, what you can do with this card in the mix is, of course, depending on how the situation is, you're going to have IP Masquerena and another monster available, right? Which technically does give you the option to make a Link 3. It's just usually you don't make a Link 3 because SP Little Knight is just better, right? And this card, however, could give you a reason to make a Link 3. Because what you can do with this card, with IP Masquerena and the monster, let's say your opponent has a... Let's say your opponent starts playing into the board, and they have a Link monster and another card. Let's say normal summon a Yummy, make Snatchy, place a field spell, right? What you can now do is you can go IP into WP Fancy Ball. You can use WP Fancy Ball to link off your opponent's Snatchy into SP. And then you not only get the banish from SP, but you've also used your opponent's Link monster as material instead of just using your own, right? So... in that regard, this card, I think on its own isn't that crazy of a card, but it does make IP Masquerena significantly stronger in certain situations and in certain matchups. You can chain the first and the second effect. You can chain... No, you cannot. This card banishes itself for cost. You cannot do both. That is one of the things that is also a little bit more balanced about this. If you want to use IP into WP, and then you can't get both effects of this card. I mean, you could link summon with it, not using it, leaving it on the field, right? But then you're not linking off your opponent's monsters. You could use the second effect first, link summon with your other monsters, and then still have the monster negation. That is something you can do. But you cannot negate and then still link with it and your opponent's monster, right? So I don't think this card is as powerful as IP Masquerena or as powerful as SP Little Knight, but it is a valuable addition into the mix. And another thing that I think this card does well, and this is something that really it covers one of the weaknesses of IP Masquerena, because what is one of the most common uses of forcing out IP Masquerena? It's like normal summon, attempt to go battle phase, right? And now you can make WP Fancy Ball with the IP. And that's significantly stronger. It's 2400, which is IP plus SP stats, by the way. I think that's some cool flavor. You summon this, and then you still have interruption from your IP Masquerena, basically, because you just turned it into the WP, and you could still go into the SP later if they commit a Link monster. So essentially, the way I interpret this card is that it would be a pretty mid card if you don't consider IP Masquerena. So it is just basically an enhancement for IP Masquerena, right? Which is not the same as SP Little Knight, because SP Little Knight was both good with IP, but also really good without SP, right? Without IP. Like you could, SP Little Knight is a good card in general. There's a lot of decks that play SP without playing IP, because SP... Honestly, arguably, SP Little Knight is a stronger card than IP Masquerena. This is not true for this card. This card entirely depends on IP Masquerena to be good. I think most of this card's uses are because of IP Masquerena. So, in some ways, IP Masquerena just keeps finding ways to get upgrades, right? Like, IP Masquerena was printed in, like, what, 2018 or 19? And for the longest time, IP into Nightmare Unicorn was like a premier interruption. And then when that started to become a little bit outdated, you know, when Nightmare Unicorn wasn't that great anymore, they made SP. And that was a great upgrade for IP Masquerena. And all of a sudden, IP Masquerena was back on the menu, right, with SP Little Knight. And now we get another upgrade to IP Masquerena with a WP Fancy Ball. So... interesting card in my opinion. Don't particularly have an issue with it because I like the fact that the negation only works once. It's not something that negates over and over and over again. However, that is also true for something like Baron de Fleur. But still, it doesn't negate everything. It doesn't negate hand traps. So if they are going to print cards that negate stuff, then I'm always a fan if there is balancing to it. You know, it's not just a straight up omni negate. You know, no monsters in hand, no spells, no traps, nothing like that. So I'm always happy when a negation isn't as broken, and I think this is the case here. And I also like the I like that when you use the negation, you cannot use the other effect in the same turn, because this card will be gone after you negate. And with the second effect, if you want to use it to its fullest potential, you are also linking the card off, so you can't negate after. That I think is good balancing between those two effects. You basically always have to choose one of the two, but you can't get both. That I think is nice, because otherwise it would be really strong if you could just negate a card and then still make SP with it after. That would probably be too powerful. So yeah, interesting card. Interesting card that opens up a lot of dimensions for IP Masquerena. And I mean, it's always exciting to see these cards in Master Duel, because technically this card can immediately be played with now in Master Duel. We don't have to wait and see if it does anything in the OCG. We can immediately see if it's going to see some use. And also, I guess one small thing is that it doesn't always have to go into SP Lil Knight, right? Like, you can make another Link monster, and since it is a Link 3, you can make a Link 4 with it. So thank God we don't have Appaloosa anymore. We could see this going into Link 4s in certain decks. So yeah, this card in Unchained will be insane. Here's the thing, I think the second effect, I think it's very matchup dependent, is what I should say. Because not every deck plays with Link 2 or lower monsters in the beginning of their combos, right? There is a lot of ways to force or to out this card before you commit to a Link summon, because you can only link off Link monsters with this, right? You cannot link off Exceeds, Synchros, main deck monsters. So if your opponent has any way to force or out this card beforehand, then you won't get this ability, right? Oh yeah. Okay. That being said, we get a free pull from this pack, so maybe we'll pull it right away. Is this card bad news for Yami? It is good against Yami, yes.